And thank you to everyone who has written to me about that Channel 4 documentary, including sending me your complaints that you sent to Ofcom. And that's all the official narrative thus far. Huge international story, endlessly picked over in the legacy media and on social media. Immediately, a GoFundMe was launched, which, whether you like it or not, Slater's made this a matter of public interest. The moment you put yourself out there in the public domain and are asking for money, and I know it wasn't you launched it, but you were the recipients of it. That is a matter of public interest. Now, I've been a journalist for decades, and I can tell very quickly when a documentary is not telling a story, but when it is skewed in support of carrying a message, an agenda-led documentary, if you wish. This documentary, in my opinion, is just that. Essentially, this was the disappearance of Jay Slater, how his family want it to be told, which fortunately aligns with the story told at inquest and the conclusion of his cause of death. The Leeds production company, Candour Productions, had extraordinary access to the case from Jay's post-mortem to Jay's inquest, and they set out their stall in the press release for Channel 4. These were Candour Productions were the only cameras in the world that were granted full access. And do you know what comes with being granted full access? Compliance. Doing what the subject want you to do. Oh, yes, indeed. As I said, this is a documentary with an agenda, probably several, but one of them is absolutely, unquestionably, 100% to target content creators online. And legacy media are more than happy to do that, as people like us are taking their audience. We are showing them for the lies and propaganda that they are. So, of course, production companies and Channel 4, they're all part of legacy media. Of course, they are more than happy to put the boot into content creators, okay? But the thing is, I am deeply troubled by the overarching agenda of this production. As you can imagine, I am not alone. Many people are upset, and not least some of the content creators they targeted in the broadcast. And as I say, complaints have been sent to Ofcom about it. And I thought it was really interesting. They went fulsomely after these content creators, like proper full on. And I suspect that's why the big fat elephant in the room was not mentioned. And the big fat elephant in the room who was not mentioned has done more to spread information on this case than anybody else that I know about is one Mark Williams-Thomas. Okay, Mark Williams-Thomas is an ex-cop. But this is a man who came out and he made a 2-part podcast series, and he claimed to have got close to the Slater family, and they didn't once mention him. Yet the very things that he'd come out with about, for example, Jay had knives down his trousers, which had gone from Lucy to Mark Williams-Thomas, that information that Jay had been involved in stealing a watch, that was all accredited to these loose cannon content creators. But yet nothing to say about Mark Williams-Thomas. Now, is that because Mark Williams-Thomas is a TV cop who supplies work to the legacy media channels? What is interesting is I think that what happened to Jay Slater is essentially told within seconds of the documentary. What you get, it's a reenactment of Lucy reporting Jay's disappearance to the police. She doesn't know why he went up to the mountains to an Airbnb with the 2 men that we later find out to be Rocky and Ahab. She told about her last conversation with Jay, and she had told him to go back to the Airbnb and get a lift, and he said he couldn't. Well, straight off the bat, why was Jay Slater, a man who didn't know the territory, prepared to face a significantly, seriously difficult walk back to his apartment rather than go back and get a lift from friends? So that already was like, is triggering to me. It's like something's kind of off about that. Debbie said when they heard Jay was missing, they headed to Tenerife. They got there and she received a message which was threatening her. And the message said, I'll give you one warning. Your son won't be coming back. He owes us enough effing money. Kiss goodbye to him. So Debbie had received that message, but yet she still supports the idea that Jay fell to his accidental death. I'm not sure that I definitely haven't reached that same conclusion. And were I receiving a message like that when I've arrived onto a holiday island looking for my son, telling me, I'll give you one warning, your son won't be coming back because he owes us money, I would see that as a significant threat to his life. But there were issues that were behind him that people online knew about, yet were kind of like dismissed as nothing in this documentary. And that included the attack of one young lad, and Jay was part of the gang involved in that, and had received a conviction for it, but that was really downplayed. He wasn't involved, really nothing to do with him. And the idea was that they were trying to make out that Jay was just, you know, a lad going off on his first holiday, without really looking into what he was potentially doing out there in Tenerife and with people who seemed to spend an awful lot of time on Tenerife and not holidaying. And so the coroner's office was working hand in hand to create a certain narrative with the family, it would appear. But we also cannot have manipulated and crafted storylines when you have been involved in asking for public funds, which amassed a huge amount, if I remember. It went well over 50 grand and beyond that. It was extraordinary access, which is absolutely one way you can tell this is an establishment narrative, because these cameras went where media normally can't. Access to the coroner, James Adeley, who was scathing about other theories. A lot of it felt really intrusive and inappropriate, but all of this was co-signed by Jay Slater's family, 100%. Jay's dad really believed that the truth lay with Rocky and Ayab. Yet at the end of the inquest, he was happy to believe that that Jay had died as a consequence of being unprepared for a difficult terrain and an accidental fall. Richard Shepherd. But what he had to say, I thought, was actually quite interesting, because he said, we can deduce, I'm paraphrasing him here, but we can deduce that Jay likely died as a consequence of a fall. What we can't tell is whether he was pushed or not. And I thought that was one of the most honest things that was said in the entire documentary. Because as Jay's dad actually said, how can you rely on a convicted drug dealer who has taken your son into the mountains? And he wanted to ask Rocky and Ayab why. He said he wanted to pump them with truth drugs. Both Rocky and Ayab were seen in a car with Jay apparently on the way to this Airbnb. And what they said was witnesses expressed fears, not about the court process itself, but about social media comment that may follow. The doctor said social media made obtaining answers more difficult in this case. So the blame for lack of witnesses around Jay Slater was firmly blamed on social media commentators and content creators, which in itself is extremely problematic. And the coroner ruled there was no third party involved in Jay's death. He said there was no evidence anywhere of third-party involvement, that Jay had been up for almost 24 hours. This is simply a young man who didn't appreciate the circumstances he was getting himself into. He said, I've just got a message that's just come through from Jay. And the message that went through was, listen, I'm not going to make it. Now, if you've fallen down a ravine and the fall killed you, you're not going to be able to send a Snapchat. Okay. And Debbie Duncan said that was the last message he sent. It's kind of like he knew he just wasn't going to make it. Yes, I think so. Absolutely it is. And his mum had all these weird clues that it might not be an accident. And yet this documentary was very much driven in that way and concluded that way. But I do take issue with the fact that she is being used now, absolutely used, as Gossip Girl said, as the most useful of idiots. And that is a reality. Because let me just continue with this. There was so much unprecedented and inappropriate footage, which continued at Jay's Accrington funeral. There were cameras in church, all access production. Some of it left me so uncomfortable and feeling as if it was so heavy on emotion, and it felt like emotional manipulation. It was the whole issue of how to identify his body, and all that was weird and uncomfortable because he'd been left in this heat and in this terrain, and it wasn't easy to identify his body. Some people say that was not Jay. And it came down to what he was wearing largely. And but Richard Shepherd said that the head injury was consistent with a fall. And as I say, but he just couldn't rule out whether he was pushed or not. But that didn't go down for the coroner. And they filmed Debbie saying it's been a year on and I still can't bear to unpack his case. And she did that for the cameras, goes through his bag that he was seen with and which they had received from the Spanish police. And she said she didn't believe the stuff about the watch taken off of a Romanian guy. No, my son, he wasn't capable of it from the videos and he wasn't a thief. The family were satisfied with the inquest and the cause of death. Both the mum and dad felt that they had the truth and they said that they can now process it as a tragic accident. But this is where it all turns. And that's fine. If that's what the family can do, then more power to their elbow. But as I said, this is where it turns, because Debbie was like, but I will never understand why social media detectives have been destroying people's lives. The YouTubers and the TikTokers have made this a million times worse. This documentary was about clamping down on content creators, an attempt to silence anyone deemed a conspiracy theorist. And it was a clear attack on online commentators. And Sarah Smith was, we will make contact with platforms and challenge them. And Debbie wants it to stop. And I can understand why. But Debbie, I'm sorry, I'm going to put you slightly in the category of the McCanns now. And that is the McCanns did what you're attempting to do now. And that is control the media and the public output about what they think about your case. And that's not okay. Debbie wants to be the guardian of this story. And that includes what he said on social media about her son having drugs in his system. She said they were powerless to stop it. The real story about the documentary is why they didn't include this man. And he was being fed information from, amongst others, Jay's friend, Lucy. Iffy Lucy, am I allowed to say that? It's a matter of opinion, not fact. And he had first-hand accounts from Lucy, from Ahab, the convicted drug dealer who Jay accompanied back to an Airbnb and who Jay's father said, should I even believe a convicted drug dealer? And Mark Williams Thomas was receiving information from them, which is including about Jay having stolen a watch, about Jay apparently putting knives down his trousers. And then it turned out that apparently none of those things we were told were true, right? And yet Mark Williams Thomas has a much bigger platform than these content creators who were being targeted. So why wasn't Mark Williams Thomas targeted in this documentary? I watched the Wax Unfiltered one. As I say, he's one of the content creators targeted by the Channel 4 documentary. And he had very similar thoughts to me about where the hell was Mark Williams Thomas. He talked also about how it was Lucy who was feeding Mark Williams Thomas. And he also claimed it was Lucy who took the picture of Jay in the back of the car smiling. The reality is that was a whitewash. That documentary was a whitewash. It's an official narrative, but it's also an official narrative with an agenda. And we have to be extremely careful about what it is telling us. Debbie Jay's mum absolutely wants new laws because of what happened to her son. That's really what's happened. And she's been given all manner of TV sofas in which to espouse this. She's calling for a change in the law to stop misinformation on social media platforms. We've already had that. This is a matter in the public domain, and it is not for you or anybody else to tell other people how they should be thinking. Who then decides what is mis and disinformation on social media? Do you trust the people who are drawing up these laws to decide what is fact on social media? I don't. Channel 4 was originally sold on quality programming. It has produced some great documentaries in its time. But in amongst those, they have inserted mockumentaries, and this was one of them. And essentially what's happening is Jay Slater, the missing Lancashire lad, and a very sad end for him, is now being used to censor social media, and his mum very sadly is the pawn in the game being used to do it.